Number 10. Horrible mutations. In 1986, the Chernobyl meltdown caused one of the highest ever accidental releases of radioactivity in human history. When the graphite moderator in Reactor 4 became exposed to air, it ignited, resulting in plumes of radioactive fallout raining across Ukraine, Russia, and much of Europe. The result of this radioactive fallout was a heavy dose of mutation for the animals living within close proximity to the reactor and the nearby town of Pripyat. The energy from all that radiation caused DNA molecules of living animals to break down. Thanks to the cesium-37 and iodine-131 isotopes released into the food chain, many animals suffered horrible mutations. Near Chernobyl, scientists discovered a massive increase in genetic abnormalities in ordinary farm animals. Within just 3 years, deformities spiked. Between 1989 and 1990, there was a huge increase of deformed animals, with at least 400 being born in 1990 alone. The severity of these mutations was so extreme that most animals died within just a few hours. Some of the most common deformities found near Chernobyl were facial malformations, animals born with too many appendages, horses born a fraction of the size they're supposed to be, and unusual coloring. Domestic farm animals were the most brutally mutated, specifically pigs and cattle. Additionally, scientists discovered that cows that had been exposed to the fallout or fed feed that had been exposed to radioactive materials literally produced radioactive milk from their udders. Number 9. The Chernobyl Mothman. Back before the catastrophic disaster at Chernobyl in 1986, workers from the nuclear power plant apparently witnessed some kind of flying monster. Reports came in that the workers saw something resembling the legendary Mothman flying above the nuclear reactor immediately before the explosion. Eyewitnesses saw a creature with huge wings, a body with no head, and a pair of weird spindly legs. For those not familiar with the Mothman, the creature is supposed to be a bad omen that appears before some kind of massive disaster. Robert Maxwell, an amateur archaeologist, visited the Chernobyl explosion site to get to the bottom of the strange sightings. From what he could gather, in the days leading up to April 26, 1986, the supernatural creature was spotted by several different men inside of the control room. These men also claimed that they witnessed the terrifying creature just minutes before the actual explosion. Additionally, those same people who witnessed the Mothman also suffered from horrible nightmares, with some even claiming they received threatening anonymous phone calls afterwards. Although why the Mothman would terrify someone over the phone is anybody's guess. The strangest part about this is that the legend of the Mothman was born in the United States back in 1966 and 1967, after it was sighted just before the Silver Bridge collapsed and killed 46 people. It's hard to say what the Mothman was doing all the way over there in Europe. Number 8. The wolves of Chernobyl. One of the most fascinating things found by scientists in the forests outside Chernobyl is wolves. Even though humans are not allowed to live inside the exclusion zone where the nuclear reactor exploded, that hasn't stopped a huge wolf population from growing inside the 2,672 square mile, 6,920 kilometer exclusion zone throughout Belarus and Ukraine. These wolves have adapted very well to living without humans and don't seem to mind a little bit of radiation. According to a recent study in the European Journal of Wildlife Research, the wolves repopulated the area almost immediately and now live in a thriving ecosystem filled with prey and not a single human around to hunt them. After fitting 14 gray wolves with GPS collars, researchers tracked the movements of the wolves and discovered that the animals were using the radiated exclusion zone as a kind of animal sanctuary. Researchers and environmental scientists have also found that the effect of radioactivity on wild animals is significantly less dangerous than the effect of living close to humans. Even though Chernobyl might be a little toxic, it's still acting as a wildlife preserve, especially for wolves. But not just wolves. There are foxes, horses, lynxes, brown bears, bison, and at least 200 bird species currently thriving with absolutely no human interference. I wonder if one day we'll have a Chernobyl zoo of mutated animals. Would you ever go see them? Let me know in the comments down below, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Number 7. Radioactive chupacabra. Veterinarians in the Ukraine recently struggled to identify a horrifying mutant animal that had been shot by hunters in a remote part of the country. According to locals, this mysterious creature is the legendary chupacabra, which has been sighted several times in Ukraine in the past few years. The Ukrainian chupacabra is said to feast on rabbits, goats, and even house pets. It has huge fangs and a long neck with short legs kind of like a kangaroo. Only a handful of people have witnessed this beast. That is, until the creature arrived at the veterinarian's office. The corpse was taken by the vets to the Zoological Museum of Zaporozhye National University, where nobody could really determine what the animal was. The creature looked like a cross between a fox and a dog. Some scientists speculated it could have been a coyote that had become infected by parasites. But according to the professionals at the university, the most likely explanation was that the animal was a type of hybrid or a mutant. But no matter what it was, there was honestly no way to tell for sure if it was the chupacabra, as there aren't exactly any chupacabra DNA tests. Number 6. The giant catfish. You may have seen the videos online of giant catfish swimming around inside of the Chernobyl power plant's cooling pond. And while at first glance these catfish may appear to be radiated mutants, they're not. These fish are definitely much larger than they normally are, but apparently the oversized fish living in Chernobyl didn't get that way because of radiation. According to radiation specialist Dr. Timothy Mousseau, almost no mutations in the wild actually lead to an animal being much larger than it's supposed to be. Instead, animals typically grow smaller and become less efficient. In the case of the massive fish thriving at Chernobyl, specifically the Wells catfish, it has more to do with the isolated habitat of the cooling pond. There are no predators inside the pond, so there's plenty to eat, and since catfish are known for being active predators, they'll feed on pretty much anything. They spend their entire lives eating and growing. Plus, these catfish had been living inside the cooling pond at Chernobyl for a very long time. These fish can live over 50 years and can grow to be at least 350 pounds, 160 kilograms, with some claims saying even 800 pounds, 365 kilograms. But that's not to say there are no radioactive fish in the waters around Chernobyl. When Jeremy Wade from Animal Planet's River Monsters went to investigate the fish living here, he found a massively radiated fish that he said was 16 times more radioactive than a normal fish. So it's definitely not the best place to pick up a fish for dinner. Number 5. Unidentified creature. On the shores of the Teteriv River in Ukraine, not far from the Chernobyl exclusion zone, somebody recently captured a video of a strange, unidentified creature flopping around in the sand. The thing was discovered on the banks of the river and nobody can figure out what it is. The guy who filmed the creature tried to catch it, but it managed to slip away back into the water and vanish. So far, there have been a few theories as to the identity of this bizarre monster. Some say it's a fish, others say it's an unknown type of crocodile, while others say it's a brand new species of mutant that has arisen because of the nearby nuclear power plant. All we know for sure is that the monster had a huge set of teeth, it was green and looked like it may have had scales, and it thrashed like a fish when flailing back into the river. And there's no way this was a hoax, as the footage looked way too real. All we can hope for now is that someone spots and captures this mutant beast soon before it breeds and fills the waterways with creepy crocodile-like monsters. Number 4. A mutant goat. Far from the radioactive forests of Ukraine, a mutant goat was born. You don't need radioactive soil to produce a mutant. In India, a baby goat was born with the face of a human or maybe a monkey, and it terrified the villagers. According to Fox News, the deformed mammal was at first perplexing to the villagers in Nemodia. But they soon labeled the mutant goat as an avatar of God and began to worship the thing. Unbeknownst to them, the goat is definitely not an avatar of anything. It probably suffers from a type of congenital defect called cyclopia. This is literally how you get a cyclops. The deformity can occur in humans or animals, though it is incredibly rare. The result of cyclopia is facial dysmorphism. In the case of this poor goat, it was born with a face like a monkey. The saddest part about this is that the animal probably won't live a very long life. With such a severe mutation, the human-faced goat will be checking out before it can reach adulthood. Number 3. The elephant's foot. If you think monsters and mutants are scary, just check out the elephant's foot inside of the Chernobyl disaster zone. The elephant's foot is actually the epicenter of the disaster. It's a mass of molten radioactive material that was once so deadly that anyone who stood near it would pretty much melt into a pile of sludge. The elephant's foot was powerful enough to kill a man within 300 seconds that stood close to it. Almost no other single feature anywhere on Earth has ever been quite so radioactive. Even though the elephant's foot has lost most of its power already, it's still a force to be reckoned with. The elephant's foot emits heat, it still produces dangerous level of radiations, and it can't be moved out of the depths of the reactor. It's actually one of the most dangerous things in the world, even today. But how did this weapon of destruction get made in the first place? When reactor number 4 exploded and the destruction ensued, including the reactor core spewing out lava-like fire and melting the concrete floor, a huge mess of radioactive material ended up collecting in the basement of unit number 4. This mass of material was built of the most radioactive components in the explosion, including nuclear fuel. It became a solid mass looking just like an elephant's foot. Even 10 years after the disaster, 500 seconds of close exposure would kill a human being. This monstrous tomb of radioactivity is going to be deadly for the next 100,000 years. Number 2. The Godzilla wolffish. Across the world in Japan, a local fisherman caught a horrifying Godzilla-like wolffish that may have mutated because of the nuclear disaster that happened at the Fukushima power plant. Apparently, horrifying fish monsters just like this wolffish have been showing up ever since the toxic tragedy unfolded on the coast of Japan over 10 years ago. This giant fish was caught by a professional named Hirosaka Hiroshi after he went searching for proof of freak animals changed by exposure to radioactivity. A typical wolffish will grow to be a maximum of 3 feet. However, the unnatural specimen caught by the Japanese fisherman was at least 6 feet (1.8 meters) in length and weighed 5 times more than it normally would. Many locals believe the fish was definitely the result of fallout from the nuclear disaster. However, scientists aren't so sure. According to the experts, this fish could just be extremely old, meaning it's been growing for a long time. They say that even though radioactive waters are continuously flowing into the Pacific Ocean from the broken Fukushima power plant, they probably aren't causing the local fish to turn into Godzilla monsters. What's really strange is that the fish was captured off the coast of Hokkaido, near the border of Russia. It wasn't found directly by the Fukushima plant, so there's no direct evidence that the wolffish was a true mutant, though it definitely could have been. Number 1. The dogs of Chernobyl. If you thought the wolves of Chernobyl were fascinating, you have to meet the dogs of Chernobyl. These abandoned pets have formed their own canine community. Hundreds of stray dogs have been surviving inside the forests around the Chernobyl exclusion zone, and they're almost all direct descendants of the house pets that were left behind when residents were forced to flee the area and leave their beloved pets behind. According to a report from The Guardian, there are currently 300 dogs inside the exclusion zone, living through harsh Ukrainian winters and carrying elevated levels of radiation in their fur. Scientists say these dogs have a shorter life expectancy and barely live beyond the age of 6. But the big question here is, are the dogs going to turn into giant radioactive wolf beasts in the next few years? Unfortunately, that probably won't happen. Unlike in video games, prolonged exposure to radiation doesn't really make animals larger and stronger. Instead, they die sooner and they're born with deformities. Oddly enough, there is a US nonprofit called Clean Futures Fund that has set up a trio of veterinary clinics in the area to care for all the stray radiated dogs. They've been neutering them and helping to keep them safe. But even though these pups are cute, you probably wouldn't want to adopt one. You know, because of the radiation and all. Number 10. UFO in the forest. An unidentified flying object has been spotted hovering over a forest in Poland, and it has left people scratching their heads over what it could possibly be or who it could possibly be. The photos of this giant UFO are apparently legit, with the baffled eyewitnesses even reporting hearing strange sounds as the UFO buzzed just over the tree line. The original photo of the UFO was captured by a man named Philip Mantle, and a photo expert named Jason Gleave even inspected the images and reported them to be 100% genuine. The bizarre flying object was spotted by Philip one day as he rode his bike in a remote forest near the small village of Jastrow, about 180 miles, 290 kilometers from Warsaw. The UFO came down, made a whole bunch of weird noises, and then vanished without a trace. Of course, mainstream scientists want nothing to do with this discovery, and the only people willing to comment on it are alleged UFO experts. It's not clear what the UFO was doing in Poland, nor if it came from space or was part of a government research project. It never lowered itself more than 200 feet, 61 meters above the ground, and no creepy aliens were seen emerging from its insides. Number 9. Disturbing remains in Mississippi woods. Some very disturbing remains were recently found inside of a Mississippi forest, and nobody knows what exactly they were for. An avid outdoorsman named Chris Mann came across a spooky leftover bag while walking along the Coldwater River during a hunting trip. What he found inside the bag took his breath away. According to Chris himself, the bag was white and black, covered in mud, and more than a little peculiar. Curious, Chris picked up the bag and opened it. If he had any expectations of the contents inside, the items certainly didn't match them. He found stripper clothes, including heels and thongs. That's probably the last thing you'd expect to find in the middle of the woods. It was pretty obvious that something wasn't right about this, so Chris decided to call the law enforcement authorities. Unfortunately, the authorities never made any headway with the investigation. Whoever left the perplexing bag of clothes in the middle of nowhere was never identified. To this day, it's unclear whether the clothes belonged to someone who went missing in the Mississippi forest, or if they could have belonged to somebody that was probably murdered and disposed of. Or maybe somebody had a double life and decided to call it quits. What do you think? Number 8. Mysterious ancient sword. A man named Roman Novak walked into the forest to look for mushrooms and ended up stumbling upon a mysterious sword instead. And this was no ordinary sword either. It turned out to be an ancient blade that was 3,300 years old. This went down in the Czech Republic when Roman went out for a stroll after a rainstorm in a forest near his home. The sword was sticking right out of the ground. What's really crazy about this is that the sword must have been sitting there for a very long time without anyone ever spotting it, even though it was so obvious. Roman took the sword to some local archaeologists who dated the artifact to be from around 1300 BC. It was actually quite similar to bronze swords crafted in Germany around the same time. But the archaeologists took it a step further. They used X-ray technology to look deeper into the metal, at which point they revealed the sword had not been used in combat, but instead had probably been for symbolic purposes only. And to make things even more mysterious, Milan Richley from the Ethnographic Museum in Jesenik said that such an artifact is extremely rare to find in the area because 3,000 years ago, almost nobody lived there. To this date, nobody knows who the ancient sword belonged to, how it wound up so far from any other ancient society, or what happened to its owner. Why do you think the sword was there, and who put it there? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Number 7. The Louisiana Swamp Monster. According to Cajun legend, one of the most disturbing things ever found in the woods was the Louisiana Swamp Monster. This beast allegedly lives in the mucky marshes of Louisiana and is a huge part man, part beast, and maybe even part werewolf with red eyes and extremely sharp teeth. Apparently, it preys on those who venture too deep into the swamps by themselves. It's often said that the monster used to be a cursed man who must shed another's blood in order to break the spell cast upon him and reassume human form. But the story varies according to the teller. Now, there's obviously quite a bit of controversy surrounding the Louisiana Swamp Monster. After all, there's been no physical evidence of a werewolf-type beast living in the bayou. This creature is basically the swamp version of North America's Bigfoot. And even though not many people have spotted the monster, locals still believe it exists. Some experts say the Louisiana Swamp Monster is nothing but a fairy tale, while others say the legends could have come from some kind of humanoid alligator that has long since gone extinct. Number 6. The Forrest Fenn Treasure. The treasure of a man named Forrest Fenn was a real-life mystery in the 21st century. Forrest Fenn is a 90-year-old Santa Fe author and artifacts dealer who in 2010 hid a treasure chest in the Rocky Mountains, starting one of the greatest treasure hunts in modern times. It's been estimated that at least 350,000 people went in search of the treasure. But you're probably wondering how it all started. Forrest Fenn wanted people to have an old-fashioned classic adventure, so he included clues to the treasure's whereabouts inside of a 24-line poem which was published in his memoir. He took a 20-pound, 9-kilogram chest, filled it with 22 pounds, 10 kilograms of treasure, and transported it to the hiding place himself. This guy really wanted ordinary people to have a chance at riches and adventure, and it worked. Some quit their jobs to try and find it, and at least 5 people died while combing through the wilderness for the legendary chest. After 10 long years, the treasure was finally discovered. The treasure was found by a man who preferred to remain anonymous, but when he found it, he sent a picture to Fenn, who confirmed that he did indeed find it. It's unclear exactly how he found it, but it's safe to say he was one heck of a modern treasure hunter. Number 5. Mysterious human remains. Hunters wandering through a remote forest on the Big Island of Hawaii discovered something extremely disturbing. Jonathan Dorrego, 20, and Randall Matos, 18, were hunting pigs in what is known as the eucalyptus forest when they stumbled upon the grisliest thing they had ever seen: the mysterious skeletal remains of a human being suspended from a eucalyptus tree. Dorrego said, "We were walking for maybe about 10 minutes and then my dog disappeared. She just started to bark. Me and Randall were answering the dog bark, figuring it was going to be a pig. We climbed up the gulch and seen the rope, and there was a person hanging. The rope was slung over a branch about 10 feet, 3 meters off the ground," he continued. Roughly 5 feet, 1.5 meters away from the body lay an axe and another bundle of rope. According to one of the hunters, it was clearly recognizable as a human being. However, this was only because the skull was obviously human. The rest of the skeleton was almost unidentifiable. It must have been there for a very long time because the body was totally decomposed. "I was kind of in shock," Dorrego said. "I was hoping it wasn't real. But as we got closer, we could smell him and we could just tell it was the real deal. So right there we made a little video to show the cops, and then we just turned around and went straight to the police station and made a report." It's not exactly clear how the person died or if there was a brutal murder that unfolded in the quiet Hawaiian woods, but the authorities are definitely running DNA tests to find out what kind of mystery these unlucky hunters found themselves tangled in. Number 4. Ancient Amazon Burials. Speaking of creepy human remains being discovered, archaeologists found some of the oldest human burials in the Amazon jungle at a place called Treasure Island in Bolivia. It's actually just a mound of forest smaller than half a football field, sticking out of the tropical lowlands like a little island with a moat around it. And this is the spot where archaeologists working along with earth scientists found what can only be described as a garbage dump dating back almost 11,000 years, filled with snail shells, charcoal from fires, and human remains. There have been at least 5 bodies uncovered on Treasure Island. According to a recent report from the Smithsonian Magazine, they're the oldest human remains documented in Amazonia. suggesting a very ancient group of hunter-gatherers moved into the region and tried to settle down. But here's where history takes an amazing turn. The research team has suggested that the presence of forage foods, such as snails, may mean that hunter-gatherers were running out of things to hunt and gather. And this ultimately led to some of the first ever plant domestication in South America. Basically, these may have been the first people to start burying their dead ritualistically on the continent, and then they began experimenting in the region with agriculture. Number 3. Russian UFO crater. In a discovery a little more out of this world, there's something known as the UFO crater in the Siberian forest. Some people believe the crater could be the leftover scar of a neutron star shooting all the way through planet Earth, though this is one of the wilder theories. The crater is known properly as the Potam crater, and it has been baffling scientists for decades ever since it was first discovered in 1949 by the Russian geologist Vadim Kolpakov. The crater is about 520 feet, 158 meters in diameter, and looks extremely out of place in the otherwise totally forested region. Locals even claim the crater is cursed, and after an expedition in 2005 when the leader of the investigating team died from a heart attack, a lot of people were afraid to go anywhere near it. Of course, there was another expedition, and this time nobody died. It turns out that the crater is only about 500 years old, but even after rock was collected and studied, scientists still don't understand what formed the crater. It definitely wasn't a volcano, it probably wasn't the 1908 Tunguska meteorite that exploded over Siberia, and it's doubtful that a spaceship landed and left behind a large pile of limestone. To this day, the Russian UFO crater is still an enormous mystery. Number 2. Old House Woods. The mysterious and supposedly cursed Old House Woods has been called the most haunted forest in the world by those who live in Virginia and have walked through its spooky paths. There are about 50 acres of dense pine trees and marshland in which paranormal phenomena are abundant. One of the more horrific things that has apparently been spotted in the Old House Woods is a strange skeleton crew dressed in ancient armor. A witness from 1929 reported seeing an entire group of skeletons carrying lanterns and marching solemnly through the forest. But of course, this was 1929 and the eyewitness could well have just been crazy. There are other stories too though, about pirates from the 1600s burying treasure here and the remains of buccaneers buried under the soil. With this comes sightings of ghostly ships floating through the trees as if on water and shadowy crew members on board peering off to the distance. Some say that if the forest is ever excavated, archaeologists will find a treasure trove of pirate bones and lost hikers. Number 1. Ancient horse skeleton. The 15,000-year-old bones of a horse were recently discovered in the rural backyard of a Utah family. This isn't a huge surprise, as residents of Utah have found all kinds of Ice Age creatures in the forest surrounding their homes. There have been mammoths, saber-toothed cats, and even something known as a short-faced bear, all found within arm's reach of society, usually buried in a backyard or under a foot of dirt in the woods. But this newest find is rather unique. After the family discovered the skeleton while working in their backyard, they got in touch with a guy named Rick Hunter, who works as a paleontologist with the Museum of Ancient Life at Thanksgiving Point. Hunter traveled to the Utah home to check out the bones of the horse. But even after dating the sediments which the horse was encased in back to between 14,000 and 16,000 years ago, Hunter couldn't determine how the horse had gotten there. He couldn't tell what killed it or why the skull of the horse was found in fragments and 10 teeth about 50 feet, 10 meters from the rest of the skeleton. Number 10. The oldest animal ever. In a shocking recent discovery, the oldest land animal known to mankind was found thanks to fossil imprints in Scotland. These fossil imprints were radiometrically dated to roughly 425 million years ago, during what is known as the Silurian period. What is this animal? It shouldn't be that surprising. You might think it was an insect, and you'd be right. It was a disturbing-looking creature no matter how you slice it. Yes, the oldest animal known to have ever lived on land was a millipede, roughly an inch long, 2 centimeters, and pretty terrifying looking. Of course, there were even earlier animals from the even earlier Cambrian period, but they're only known about because of their fossilized tracks. There hasn't been any fossilized evidence of anything older than this tiny millipede. According to scientists, this single millipede may have helped kickstart the evolutionary chain that resulted in everything we see around us today. All we know about this weird animal right now is that it lived close to lakes, it probably ate decomposing plants, and it was found in the same region where the oldest known plant with a stem, the Cooksonia, was found. The only thing that scientists believed predated this millipede was a type of soil worm, which they believe probably appeared on land about 450 million years ago. Number 9. Christian cemetery. Archaeologists in Poland recently found a cemetery from the 11th century filled with terrifying corpses. The cemetery is about 1,000 years old, and it's believed to be the oldest Christian burial ground in the region. Poland actually adopted Christianity as its official faith in the year 966. And this cemetery comes from right around that same time. Archaeologists have found about 30 graves belonging primarily to women and children. The lead archaeologist for the project said that they used psychochemical analysis of the bones to properly identify the dates of the deaths. But it's not the age of the burials that makes them so strange, it's the way in which the people were buried. One of the women was found with a massive boulder over her chest, while another woman was found buried in the fetal position. Evidence suggests that many of these women were actually tied up when they were buried, which is pretty disturbing. Is it possible that the women were considered witches? Definitely. They could have also been heretics, people who didn't believe in Christianity and were therefore persecuted for their beliefs. It was not uncommon for people in those days to bury the dead with strange restraints to keep them from coming back as zombies. So that could have also been the cause. Aside from the weird way in which many of the people were buried, archaeologists discovered several small metal crosses, which they see as evidence that the citizens had recently been converted to Christianity. But it could also be evidence that the townspeople placed those there to ward off evil spirits from possessing the bodies and bringing them back as undead creatures. Number 8. Ancient dog bones. In February of 2021, it was reported that researchers discovered the oldest known dog bones in the Americas. These ancient bones have managed to shed some light on how man's best friend ended up in North and South America. Of course, this doesn't really have anything to do with canine domestication, as some estimates say that 25 million years ago, a special breed of dog evolved from a massive canine species known as bear dog, which likely hunted throughout much of the world. Dog domestication has been going on for millennia. But these new canine remains have shown researchers from the University of Buffalo just how modern man and modern dog solidified their relationship in what is today Canada and the United States. The dog bones themselves were discovered back in 1998 in Alaska during excavations near Wrangel Island, which revealed about 50,000 prehistoric remains from both humans and animals. But it wasn't until just now that research was done proving that one of the bone fragments came from the femur of a dog 10,150 years ago. Additional analysis showed that this dog had diverged from Siberian dogs almost 17,000 years ago. That means that at the same time that the dogs we know today were diverging from their ancient ancestors, our own ancient ancestors were migrating into North America for the first time in the planet's history, bringing along their four-legged friends. Do you have a dog? What kind of dog is it? Tell me about it anyway in the comments below. Then remember to subscribe to American Eye if you haven't already for more amazing videos just like this one. Number 7. The 3D universe. For the first time in history, scientists have revealed the biggest three-dimensional map of the universe ever. This map was released to the public in 2020 and is the result of 20 years of studying and data collection done by an international group of astrophysicists. The data collected was from a telescope in New Mexico, and the construction of the map was assisted by members of the Sloan Digital Sky Survey, which happened to be one of the most complex astronomical surveys ever completed. And unsurprisingly, this major project received its funding not from the government, but from a nonprofit science research organization. As for this impressive map itself, it was produced using measurements of over 2 million galaxies. According to the lead researcher for the project, Will Percival, the 3D map shows 11 billion years of our universe. The only unfortunate thing is that the map doesn't actually work like a hologram that you might see in a Star Wars movie. But if you're an astrophysicist who knows what they're looking at, it's a pretty cool advancement in space technology. I'd personally love to check out a 3D model of the universe in person, wouldn't you? Number 6. New UFO sightings. There are new UFO sightings all the time, but it's not every day that a new task force is formed to investigate UFO activity in the United States. This happened in 2020 when the Pentagon formed a task force for this very reason, to check out unidentified flying objects that have recently been spotted by U.S. aircrafts. This is a real task force as reported by CNN and confirmed by 2 defense officials. What a lot of citizens don't know is that officials have long been concerned about unidentified aircraft flying over United States military bases and interfering with military jets. Of course, the government has never come out and said the words aliens or extraterrestrials, as they normally think of UFOs as drones or some kind of foreign technology. Still, this is pretty exciting recent news, and it's actually following the official Pentagon release of 3 brief videos that showed aircrafts encountering strange phenomena. Even Senator Marco Rubio told the local Miami news network that there are things flying over military bases and nobody knows what they are, and so there are legitimate questions to ask. Number 5. The origins of COVID-19. In early 2021, the World Health Organization made a startling discovery. After months of searching, they now claim to have found the exact source of the COVID-19 pandemic. What's really crazy is that this discovery in early 2021 was not as widely reported as you'd expect. But according to the WHO themselves, They believe that the origins of the pandemic came from wildlife farms in the southern province of Yunnan in China. Their research showed that these animal farms were probably supplying animals to vendors at the wholesale market in Wuhan, where the earliest cases of the pandemic were discovered. Peter Daszak, a specialist in disease who was on the WHO team that traveled to China, recently told NPR that some of the wild animals from that farm could have been infected with COVID-19 thanks to local bats. Eventually, we'll know the whole story behind this pandemic, but it's going to take more research for sure. Number 4. A brooding dinosaur. A recent discovery has been made in the world of paleontology that has absolutely floored the scientific community. In a first for the entire world, a team of scientists have recently found a completely fossilized dinosaur nest, complete with 8 fossilized eggs perched beneath the fossilized skeleton of an adult who had been brooding over her eggs. This amazing discovery was made in the Jiangxi province of China and published in the journal Science Bulletin. The dinosaur was a type of ancient, giant bird-like monster known as an oviraptorid, and it probably lived about 66 million years ago. Out of the 24 eggs the dinosaur had been brooding over, 8 of them are still in amazing shape and 7 of them still have the preserved bones and partial skeletons of undeveloped dinosaur embryos inside of them. If you were hoping for a Jurassic Park in your lifetime, this is the kind of discovery that'll make it happen. Paleontologists working on the project say it is the rarest type of fossil that can be discovered. This is the first time in history that an embryo has been found inside of an adult oviraptorid. Hopefully, someone will start cloning these birds before it's too late. Number 3. Fearsome bug brood. In March of 2021, scientists discovered that a natural spectacle was about to take place across much of the United States. This spectacle is extremely rare and not seen anywhere else on the planet. After spending 17 years growing in total darkness, billions of cicadas were finally ready to emerge and flap their billions of wings towards the sun. These periodical insects are known as Brood X, and the last time they were seen was during the 2004 Summer Olympics when Spider-Man 2 was still in theaters. Since then, the bugs have been living underground, eating roots and biding their time before returning to the surface. The Great Migration will start in early April or May, and billions of these cicadas will fly across the entire country after crawling their way out of the ground, shedding their skin and turning into adults, then frantically searching for a mate. The really cool thing here is that periodical insects like Brood X only come out every few years to breed before dying almost immediately. Then the young created by their breeding will hide underground for another handful of years before they claw out of the dirt, turn into adults, and do the exact same thing over again. Number 2. Ancient crushed skeleton. The curious skeleton of a child from 5,700 years ago was recently found in Turkey with a crushed skull, and archaeologists don't quite know what to think about it. This child died during the Copper Age, and they were only about 6 or 7 at the time. The child was found inside the ruins of a prehistoric house and showed signs of physical trauma. The find was made by a team of Italian archaeologists at a site called the Hill of Lions. The archaeologists were working with the Turkish Culture and Tourism Ministry when they found the kid curled up in the fetal position underneath the ruins, in relatively good condition considering the age of the skeleton. Archaeologists don't know what happened to the child or why its skull was smashed, and no cause of death has been found. However, it is possible the child was frightened at the time of death, which was why it was curled into the fetal position. It's also possible that the child had been placed like that on purpose. The truth is that this is one weird discovery that archaeologists just can't make sense of yet. Number 1. Ancient Egyptian monks. A bizarre collection of quarters and churches once used by early Christian monks in Egypt were recently discovered with the help of the Egyptian Ministry of Tourism and Antiques. There were 3 early churches found connected to an old living quarters, with many of the walls scribbled with ancient biblical writings. According to archaeologists working closely with the project, the discovery shows the life of early monks during the beginnings of Egypt's Coptic Church. The buildings date back to around the 7th century AD, and they were found near the Baharia Oasis, a good 230 miles from Cairo in the middle of the Western Desert. The writing discovered mostly comes from the Bible and was written in Old Greek. The monks had been living in the region for about 200 years, though not much is known about the organization at the time or what happened to the monks who had been living inside the churches. Which of these amazing discoveries was the most amazing? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and thanks for watching. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and come back soon for another amazing video right here on American Eye.